Yesterday marked the 20-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and if any of you find any of this upsetting, just a warning, you can skip ahead or you can switch off. WWE put out a half-hour documentary called Never Forget, which documents their running the first large-scale event of its kind in the country 2 days after the attacks. You're not going to learn anything new from it, but it's still pretty powerful to reflect back on that whole week from the perspective of the folks who worked for the company at that time. At least they left out Stephanie's comments, comparing almost 3,000 people losing their lives to the government putting her father on trial for steroid distribution. Somehow that didn't make the documentary, which is good. But you see Stone Cold and other stars who were there, getting emotional, talking about how they learned about the attacks. Lillian Garcia talking about being on the phone with one of her friends downtown when the line suddenly went dead and one of the buildings collapsed. Her singing the national anthem on that show and crying right after. I think a lot of us were crying after that. Edge. He admits that he was of the mind that we shouldn't be doing this. We should be home with our families. So there were conflicting feelings, even from the people who worked in the company, about whether or not they should be doing that show. Others thought that, it would be a good idea to go out there and entertain and take people's minds off of what happened, even if just for a couple of hours. And to the fans who were in the building that night, it did mean something for them to be there. There are fans who were in the building in Houston that night who said it's I don't know if favorite is the right word, but it's the show that sticks with them, and it's an experience that they will never forget for the rest of their lives, being in the building that night, just 48 hours removed from the worst attack on American soil in the history of this country. So it is a night that a lot of people, for various reasons, will remember for a very long time to come. It's a little over 30 minutes. It's not a long watch. They are self-indulgent in moments and stuff. I know that's a turn-off for some people, but on the whole, I thought it was a very well done, well put together short documentary. I was in college when the attacks happened. I was out on Long Island. I was in my dorm room. And I had just come out of the shower, actually, and I had Good Morning America on. I had left it on the TV because that's what I used to watch back then in the morning. And on my TV, I saw one of the towers with smoke billowing out of it. And they explained what had happened. And at first you think, boy, this guy, this pilot, he must have been way off course to crash into a big building like that. Like, how do you not, of all the buildings to crash into, how do you not see that coming? And then the second plane hit. And when that happened, everybody knew what was going on. So I think even the people who maybe were already kind of thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe this is, an attack, or it was a hijacked plane or something. And I don't think a lot of people had that thought in their mind after the first one, but by the time the second one hit, I don't think there was any doubt in anyone's mind what was going on here. And that's when things got very scary. And I remember calling my mother to see if she was watching what was going on, and I got dressed. I went to go to class. And I didn't even get into the lobby of the building before I could see a small crowd of people had congregated just inside. They were looking up at the TV that was on the wall. And everybody was just transfixed on the television. And then the first building came down. And I honestly don't even remember what I did after that. I don't remember if I went back to my room or if I just sort of wandered around campus. It's kind of a blur. I don't remember. I know I never made it to class because classes were canceled for the day. So maybe that's what happened. I might have actually gone to class, in fact, you know what? That's exactly what happened. Now, it's all coming back to me now. I went to class. I had an English class. I think it was like English Lit. And I remember sitting down, and the teacher came in eventually and said he was a basket case because he knew someone who was down there, and obviously he wasn't able to get in touch with them. So you could see how frenzied he was, and that's when he said, classes are canceled. And I remember that because when I reached back out to him, Professor Brand, I reached back out to him a number of years ago, probably about 10 years ago. I hadn't talked to him in so long. And he was one of the good ones. So I wanted to keep in touch with him and find out how he was doing and everything. And he remembered me, which I was shocked by. And one of the reasons that he remembered me was the fact that I was in the room when he had rushed in and kind of told everybody that classes were canceled. So that stuck out even in his mind. And then sadly, a few years after that, he passed away. But everything else that day for me is sort of a blur. I mean, it's just a surreal experience. I was inside the World Trade Center the year before for an awards ceremony. I had won a scholarship from the New York City Lottery. It was called the Leaders of Tomorrow. That's what it was called. And they had this big ceremony. And for all the years I've lived in New York, I've never actually been to the World Trade Center. I've been to the Empire State Building, but I had never been physically in either of the towers before. And it just so happened that, the year before I was there, and I can remember being downtown, standing right at the base of both of these towers, and I remember just looking up and thinking how freaking high it was. And the thought of it, to me, not being there anymore, these two giant buildings that I had just literally been standing at the base of, looking up at, a year earlier, the idea that they're not there anymore, it was just beyond my comprehension. The thought of it falling or imploding with people still inside, it's the most horrifying thing that I've ever seen, play out on television. I can't imagine what it would have been like to see it playing out physically being there on the ground, running away, or living in a building, a couple of blocks away. To see the images of those people trapped inside that building, so desperate, jumping out of windows, jumping to their death, is something I'll never be able to get out of my head. And I had a close cousin who was supposed to be in one of the towers that day, but he had called out sick. So fortunately, I personally didn't know anybody who was in either building when they went down, although there was someone I was friendly with online at that time. I used to talk wrestling. It was an old wrestling message board that doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, this was 2001. I know that he died in one of the towers because he disappeared online for a few weeks and nobody knew where he was. And then somebody who I guess knew him or somehow found out that he was in one of the towers and he had passed away. And that was sort of the closest connection that I had to any specific person that would have been in either building. I knew more people who frankly might have been there that day, but thankfully didn't go for whatever reason. Dumb luck, fate, illness, whatever it was. And I think it was Edge in the WWE documentary who used the words post-apocalyptic to describe what the streets look like in Texas. And they were in Texas for Smackdown that week because there was no traffic. Air traffic was suspended. There was no traffic on the street. There were no cars. There were no people. Post-apocalyptic is what it looked like in downtown New York City. With smoke everywhere, people walking around covered in debris. It looked like a bomb went off. It looked like something out of a disaster movie. Only this was no movie. This was real life. It was a horrible, horrible thing that happened that day. And a lot of first responders and people who lived down there got sick after that and died. They're still getting sick today. And dying from breathing in all of that debris. Who knows how many cancer-causing chemicals were floating around in the area for months, maybe years after that. And people still went down there and they helped try to dig out and try to rebuild. People were, you see them in the footage and everything, and I don't go back and watch it too often because it's just too upsetting, but you see people literally running for their lives at these plumes of smoke and debris. chasing after them like some kind of monster. And I don't want to ignore the Pentagon and the plane also that went down in Pennsylvania, because people lost their lives there as well. A lot of people did that day, not counting the scumbags who did this. If you have never visited the 9/11 Memorial, if you are ever in New York, make the time to go downtown and visit it. It's powerful, powerful stuff to stand there in the middle of all of that, where those two buildings used to be, and think about what happened there, and to see the new tower in its place. You know, years from now, people are going to read about it in textbooks, or they're going to read about it only on Wikipedia. They weren't even born yet. Some of you listening to this right now probably weren't even born when all of this happened, everything I'm describing. And because they didn't live through it, to them, it's just going to be words on a page. But for all of the people who did live through that period and the aftermath of it, which is still being felt today, it's something that we'll never forget. I had never lived to experience anything in my life up to that point that changed the world the way that that one day changed the entire world. And it did, whether it's air travel, the wars that followed. It didn't just change this country, it changed the world. And now I feel like I've lived through a few different events like that just in the last 5 years. We're still going through one of them right now as we speak. But anyway, I just wanted to take a few minutes just to talk about that and my experience that day. And it seems like the world has only gotten crazier since then. And it's nice to have something like pro wrestling, as inconsequential as it may be in the grand scheme of things, to talk about and to tune out all of the other bullshit going on around us, even if it's only for a few hours each week. And it's one of the reasons I always say, be well and stay safe at the end of every show that I do, because you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. Take nothing for granted. Here today, gone tomorrow. Enjoy what you have. Because if you can't enjoy that, then what the hell is the point of any of this?